So, just some revision for paper 3 for your unseen fieldwork section. So, how to prepare for section B in your paper 3 GCSE exam. There are two other videos on your human fieldwork and your physical fieldwork, which will all be section B, part of your paper 3. So, there are 6 strands of fieldwork. We need to remember this for your unseen and for your own fieldwork. The first is your inquiry and hypothesis. So, that is what you are aiming to figure out. And your hypothesis, which we will talk about in a second, is what you believe your results will show. You then need to select, measure, collect, and record your data. You then need to think about how to present that data, and in your unseen fieldwork, you will get asked questions on what would be the best method of presenting data that you've been given. Describing, analysing, and explaining it, so looking for trends and patterns and giving anomalies and examples. And then reaching a conclusion, which is a summary of your results and how that links to your hypothesis. And then your evaluation, which you will do in unseen fieldwork in parts, and you will do in your own. So, what went well, what didn't go so well, what could you do to improve? So, just a reminder, your types of inquiry. An inquiry is a question that you set out to prove or disprove. And a hypothesis is similar, but it's more of a statement. And these can be both physical or human. So, in your unseen fieldwork, you may have human questions that you're given, or you may have it on physical fieldwork. What will the unfamiliar fieldwork questions ask you to do? So, this section is about testing your skills rather than your knowledge. You're not having to remember facts like we do in paper 1 and 2. You just need to know about each stage or strand of the fieldwork, and you need to be able to do your maths and your graph questions. So you might have to identify a possible inquiry question. You could suggest ways that they could collect data, so they might give you an inquiry or hypothesis. Identify the advantages and disadvantages of the data collection techniques discussed. So, what's good about it, what's not so good. Complete any maps or graphs. So, this could be things like dispersion graphs or pie charts or scatter graphs. They love a pie chart in AQA in this section. Interpret the graphs or maps. What is it showing? Is there a pattern or trend? Is there an anomaly? So, when we've taught you T, this applies in this case. Suggest how the data may be presented and justify why you think that's the way it should be presented. Carry out some calculations, so averages, range, mode, and identify possible conclusions from the data. And then you may be asked, to what extent does the data you have been given prove an original hypothesis? So when we say to you, it's really important you read all that figure and that information they give you. That's where they tell you that hypothesis. And then suggest any adaptations to the aspect of fieldwork inquiry, so what they could maybe do next time to improve it. So your data collection stage, what is the data you're going to collect? What are the different methods they're using? Is it primary, secondary, or both? And is it qualitative versus quantitative? So qualitative, remember, is like words, it can be pictures. Quantitative is numerical value. In that exam, they could ask you how to collect data for a question you've been given. So if they give you a hypothesis or an inquiry question, they may say to you, how could these students collect data? What would be the best way? You need to think about the accuracy. So is the data you are collecting done correctly through that technique? So could something have gone wrong if you use a certain technique? So if we think about our own, when we put the measurement, the ruler stick into the sand, the sample size, how big of a sample do you need? And the types of sampling, and then the reliability. Could you repeat that data and it be consistent every time? So your different sampling types you could have is systematic. So you would do that in a regular or systematic way. So it could be every 2 meters along a line, or in the case of when you might go to the beach in the Holderness Coast, you might do every other groin, or when you are questioning someone, it might be every 10th person that passes you. Stratified is where it's a population or an area that's being studied and it's like subsets. So if we're thinking about schools, different year groups, but those different year groups might have different amount of pupils in them. So it's making sure that they are proportional and representative of the whole. And then random, so you might use a random number table to choose a place or a person to be sampled. A reminder that these are on the right hand side some of the different types of data. You've got your primary versus your secondary. So land use tallies, field sketches, questionnaires, an environmental quality survey, which we did at South Bank, and a pedestrian count. That is data you have collected yourself. And then secondary data is where you have got it from elsewhere. So that could be the census, that could be a website, that could be a news article, that could be climate data or a map. So that is your sampling, your types of data. When you're looking at unseen, what type of sampling could they use and what type of data could they gather? And then for your data presentation, you may be asked to suggest appropriate presentation techniques or an alternative one. They might say, how else could they present this data? You might be asked to give an advantage or a disadvantage of doing that technique. And then, like I've said previously, plotting a missing piece of data on the graph. You need to make sure you know the difference between discrete and continuous. So, discrete is when data has clear spaces between values. So, that could be, as I've said on the screen, the number of cars counted, the number of pedestrians, the number of shops in a city centre, or a land use tally. Whereas continuous is data that falls in a sequence. So, the amount of rain, temperature, width of a pebble, it's going in a sequence. Your different ways you could present data, there are many more that I'm going to show you, but you could have line graphs, scatter graphs, pie charts, histograms, desire line maps. And then the final part of the strands of fieldwork is your conclusions and your evaluation. A conclusion is a summary of the results. It identifies patterns and trends that help you back up your hypothesis or inquiry question. So they might ask you to give a conclusion about that fieldwork you're reading about their results. Whereas an evaluation is looking at the investigation as a whole, and you need to consider what could have gone well to help them reach a reliable conclusion, what didn't go so well that might have affected the results, so human error, for example, or not enough sample size, the sample size isn't big enough, and what could you do to improve. Over the past few years, it's been really likely that AQA are going to give you a hypothesis and then they're going to ask you for like 4 marks to answer a question such as, to what extent does the data shown prove an original hypothesis of the investigation? So in this type of question for the 4 marks, we say to you all the time, you need data in your answer if there's data in front of you. Use it, the data from the graph collection methods given to you, identify any patterns or trends, so give some specific examples of, has it rapidly increased or decreased if it's about speed of a river. Consider, is there an anomaly in the data that could form your evaluation of the to a small extent. So if there is something, a number that doesn't quite look right, or on the graph it spikes, that is where you could say, well, to a small extent, it doesn't prove its original hypothesis because in section B of the river, there was a spike in the speed of the river, or there was a decrease in the speed of a river. That is all if you want to check out the human and physical geography fieldwork.